Blaster Master, Sunsoft, 1988. The intro to this game is legendary on its own. Kid with a frog, frog escapes, frog jumps on a radioactive box, frog grows huge, jumps down hole, kid jumps down after, finds tank, the search is on. But that's how it was back in the 80s. Everyone had their own radioactive surplus in their front yard. That stuff was commonplace. I remember me and my neighbors each having our own radioactive box. It was just a different time, I guess. So we jump right in with blasting away at... I don't even know what these are. Robots? Flying machines? Are these supposed to be organic life forms or mechanical? I don't know. I don't care. It's just fun running through and blasting the hell out of these things. Eventually we come across these little doors, and that's when you learn that you can actually get out of the tank and go on foot. From here the game switches to a top-down view to progress. It's a beautiful transition from side-scrolling to top-down. It doesn't feel broken or awkward, and the pace and the action is pretty seamless. This is also where you learn that this game is open-ended and you can spend hours traveling through these sections without making any progress. Each area only has one boss, and that boss is hidden at the end of one of these rooms. So if you've never played this game before, you're in for a long day. One of this game's biggest flaws is there's no passwords, no stage select, not even as a cheat code. You start the game from the beginning every time. There is simply no way around it. And on top of that, you have a limited amount of continues. It is ridiculous. Even if you know all the ins and outs of this game and know exactly where to go all the way through, it still takes quite a long time to finish. Anyway, as I was saying, there's one boss in each area, and in Area 1 we find him in this room here after traveling through some water. This big-ass brain thing. Not too complicated, slow-moving, predictable. Now here's one thing I find very cool about the design of this game. You don't just beat a boss and step into the next area right behind him, not like a linear game. The boss gives you an upgrade for your tank that lets you access the next area. So even after you beat a boss, you still have to travel around to find the next area and where to go. In this case, the upgrade we got improves our tank's firepower, so we can kill this creepy face here. Beyond that, we go on to Area 2. Area 2 kind of has a medieval atmosphere. I like it, all stone and spikes. And you have to burrow pretty deep into the area to find the boss. Which makes sense, you want a challenge. The beauty of this boss that some old school gamers might know is the pause trick. Just toss a grenade in there and pause it at just the right moment. The action stops, but the grenade continues to explode, causing damage. So just wait a few seconds, just unpause, and there you go. Easiest boss fight ever. Again, this upgrade is an improved shot for the tank. This one lets us blow apart certain walls to move on, which is exactly what we have to do to get to Area 3. One thing I like about this improved gun is we can backtrack faster through walls that were blocking our path before. So Area 3 is kind of like an industrial complex. Girders, rafters, and boxes all over the place. These little walking potatoes do a surprising amount of damage, and they take a lot of hits to kill. Those things always piss me off. So we wander around a little more, a little deeper, and eventually we come to the boss of this area. And the boss of this particular area is just a bunch of square robots. They move faster and faster, and they fire random projectiles. Quite annoying. But the reward here is the hover upgrade for the tank. One thing I always found neat about this part is as you travel back, you eventually come to this jump here that you could not have made without the hover upgrade. So the game shows you how to use the new upgrade, because you have to. Now it's one of the most asinine parts of the game. If you've never played this game, where would you think you'd go next? Clearly the hover needs to be used to get to the next area, but that could be anywhere. We've traveled through a lot of open areas, so now it's a matter of going everywhere open and flying around to try to find where it is. The location of the next area is ingenious though. It's all the way back at the beginning of the game. I mean, the very beginning. Where you first dropped into this world, that's where you have to go. This is brilliant. At this point, gamers will be trying to fly everywhere they can as they backtrack through the areas, and the place you're supposed to be is going to be the last place the player is going to get to. Area 4 is a sewer area, murky with pipes. Even the music sounds gross. The level starts off pretty linear, but then we come across the maze of corridors. I still have a hard time finding my way through this part today. Eventually, through a little frustration, we find the bottom and the boss's room. The top-down part of this area is just annoying. Narrow walkways and projectiles come at you. I usually just run right through and ignore everything just to be done with it. As we see here, the boss is a frog. Now you'd think that's your frog, the one that got away in the beginning. But apparently it's not, because we just blow it away. And again, like the boss in Area 2, we can use the pause trick. The item we get from this boss is really the only exception to the normal upgrades we get during the game. It's just a key. It doesn't do anything for the tank's powers. It really is just to open this locked wall to get to Area 5. I always thought that was kind of a lazy excuse for an item in this game. It's only used once, and it's not very rewarding to acquire. Area 5. My most hated of all the areas. It's just a water world. You just dive in and sink uncontrollably, eventually sinking all the way to the bottom, at which point you have to get out and swim the rest of the way. Now that part I think is pretty clever, designing an entire area around just you without the tank. But it's just not any fun to play this level. And worst of all, the boss you finally get to, I hate this boss most of all in this game. He starts by spewing out a couple of bubbles. No problem. But as he takes more and more damage, he fires out more and more bubbles in all directions. It becomes nearly impossible to avoid. And this is one boss you can't use the pause trick on. But after a few deaths and some patience I'm short on, I finally get our newest upgrade. The dive upgrade for the tank. So we swim all the way back to the tank, and now we can just swim around in this dive upgrade. Eventually leaving the area onto Area 6. Area 6. Ice Caverns. After fighting my least favorite boss in the whole game, I'm at least rewarded with my most favorite area in the whole game. Mostly because of the music. It just really has that 80s Nintendo synth awesomeness. So here we're obviously slipping around on the ice, so you have to be careful of your movement. One thing about these blocks you can shoot is they respawn when you leave the screen and come back. And that doesn't just mean if you leave through a door. One time I actually got all the way to this point, shot these blocks out and started climbing, then pushed start to pause the game, which brings up the tank's weapons and upgrades screen. The problem here is when I unpaused it, all the blocks were back, trapping me inside. Don't ever do that. But anyway, the boss is in this room here that I was climbing up to. And we're treated to a repeat of the boss in Area 2. But again, like Boss 2, you can use the pause trick on him. Now we have one of the greatest upgrades in history, the Wall Walker. Now we can walk up walls with our tank. How cool is that? But now we're in a much similar situation like we had with the hover upgrade. Where the hell do I go? I've seen hundreds of walls throughout the game so far. Which one could it possibly be that I need to climb? This is one aspect of the game that feels really rewarding though. After you search around endlessly for the next area, just finding it feels like a huge accomplishment. So after searching around every tall wall there is, you'll eventually find it's in this room in Area 2. This is crazy because there's a good chance you never even saw this room earlier in the game. You don't have to pass through here to progress through Area 2 at all. It's just a one-off room you happen to stumble upon by chance. But once you find it, you can breathe a sigh of relief and pride. Area 7, we've gone from ice to fire. This area is actually pretty straightforward, not a whole lot of changes in direction, so it's mostly linear. Mostly. One thing that can get confusing though is these doorways can send you back in the stage. So you might be heading right the whole time, but one of these doors sets you back to one of the first ones you saw. So you could literally be heading right infinitely if you don't take the right path. Once you figure out which doors you're supposed to be going through, finally the scenery changes with a little green in the background, and we find our boss in this room. I'm not sure what the mystery fluid's supposed to be here, but it looks pretty terrible. So again, Sunsoft recycles a previous boss from Area 4, the Frog. And again, this is not the frog you're looking for. But this time they make him all red and shoot fire. But also, again, we can use the pause trick on this guy. And now we have an even more awesome upgrade for our tank, the Ceiling Walker. Or as this game calls it, Wall Walker 2. Now our tank sticks to everything, so now we're on the hunt for the final area, Area 8. This one is actually a little less hidden than some of the previous areas we've had to find. Where we have to go is behind this wall in Area 3. Most players just happen to come up to this wall because that's the direction the level was headed when you first got in. So if you're still conscious and haven't strangled yourself with the NES controller yet, you might have some vague remembrance of this wall with no way through. Well, now there's a way. Just walk on the walls and the ceilings and laugh at the spikes as you cruise by. Area 8. You can tell this area means business. Just listen to that music. Sinister and creepy. Not to mention the area environment looks like H.R. Geiger used crayons for a day. Now up to this point the game has thrown challenge and progressive playability at us with a moderate curve. Things did get a little tricky as the areas progressed, but mostly we were kept equipped to handle it all. But Area 8 just says screw moderation and gives us a level that is brutal and damn near impossible to get through without losing your mind. First of all, the enemies are placed in just the right spots to slow your travel down to a crawl, having to stop at all points to kill them and progress. Next, there are spikes everywhere, and those things do some serious damage. Just one wrong move and you could die, even at full health. But the one thing that makes this area a pain in the ass is not so much the level design itself, it's the fact that you just got this new wall walking ability, and you haven't had a whole lot of time to get used to how it functions and operates. I find myself tracking along, waiting to the very edge of a jump to make the maximum distance, but then the tank just whips down the side of the wall. As a gamer, you're just not used to your tank that you've been using for potentially hours now, behaving in an entirely different way. Which really sucks, because I wouldn't imagine Sunsoft designed this level with that kind of mentality in mind. But it just makes a level with this many changes in terrain hard to navigate. If you happen to survive and not get arrested for sending death threats to Sunsoft employees, you'll find the boss room pretty unimpressive. It's just a square room with doors on all sides. But the end boss is just right up top, in the middle, right where you're facing when you first get here. Now we get to the end boss. Now this kind of thing irritates me. Only a little, but still. The end boss is the boss you see on the cover of the game. The end should be like a big reveal and a shock to the audience. I mean, imagine if Ganon was on the cover of Zelda. When you finally saw him in the end, it wouldn't feel as rewarding or chilling to finally see what you've been fighting for all this time. But to be fair, this isn't the last boss. Okay, fine. So once you kill this thing in the wall, this guy in armor with a shield and a whip is actually the final boss. We might not be able to use the pause trick on him, but he does have a blind spot right here we can stand in the whole time and be completely safe. Boom! The end! We see a huge mountain crumble in the distance and sit off on a cliff with our tank and frog that we found somehow. I know this probably isn't the best question, but who was that guy? I mean, usually the end ties the story together and gives a resolution of some kind. The game doesn't explain what this world was, who that guy was, how we got back out of the hole we fell in, where the frog was, what happens now, how did this huge world complete with a full sky and atmosphere exist under this kid's house? Well folks, we can blame those horrible, or awesome, plot holes and storyline failures on the localization from Japan to USA. The actual original title of the game was Super Planetary War Records Metafight, or just Metafight. Still, it's a pretty bulky title to say. Not as cool as the rhyming Blaster Master. But the original Japanese version of the game was set on a planet called Sophia III, whereas in the US release, the tank's name was Sophia III. Close, but not quite the same. In the original game, the last boss is named Emperor Goez, who has taken over much of the galaxy and invades Sophia III, the planet Sophia III. So surviving scientists build a tank called Metal Attacker to fight back and take down this prick. So the tank was called the Metal Attacker in Japan, but it was called Sophia III in the US. Right. The game's opening sequence even shows the Metal Attacker flying out of a much different area than the US version. Now that might not be the most creative or awesome story ever thought up, but at least it makes sense and ties up in the end. In the US, the plot is a kid named Jason loses his frog, finds a tank, goes to find it. It seems harder to write something that ridiculous than just make up some cliche space story. So, take it for what it is. A lot of people say the opening sequence and story are so retarded that it makes the game classics for that fact alone. I will admit I never did forget that opening from my childhood. But regardless of the story, the game is what really steals the show. The pace and action are great, slowly upgrading your tank with cooler stuff is so satisfying and fun, and the music really puts you in the experience of all the different areas. 8 out of 10.